Okay, 6 o'clock, good evening. We have a bit of a scant crowd here, but to all of you who did brave weather, thank you for coming. This is the 6th program in the Great Stone Viaduct Winter Lecture Series. Amid our rain and our tornado watch and our just right now another big torrential downpour, it's been indicative of our program, which has been a whirlwind. We're already on the 6th program. We only have 2 more lectures left after tonight's lecture. Next week, we will hear about spies, scoundrels, and rogues of the Ohio frontier. That program will take a fascinating look at the gritty, colorful side of Ohio's past, delving into the true stories of frontier intrigue where outlaws, secret agents, and larger-than-life personalities move between danger and opportunity at the edge of a growing nation. That will be presented by retired librarian and author Gary Williams, who will bring to life the daring characters who shaped Ohio's early history through espionage, deception, and unexpected heroics. That's next Wednesday, March 18th at 6 p.m. And then for our final program in the series on Wednesday, March 25th, we will learn about the history of Ohio's canal system. Tom O'Grady from Ohio University in Athens will be with us. I've been saying Athens University in Ohio all day long. I finally got it right. Ohio University in Athens. Tom O'Grady. That's Wednesday, March 25th, and he'll be talking about Ohio, the history of Ohio's canal system. These Winter Lecture Series programs are, of course, brought to you in partnership with the Great Stone Viaduct Historical Society. The committee chair for the Winter Lecture Series, Erica Keller, could not be with us, but I think Carol Baker has gladly filled in to let you know more about that tonight.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. As far as the Great Stone Viaduct goes, a few things we want to remind everybody and touch base on for those who haven't heard about it yet are the Great Stone Viaduct annual membership applications are located at the back table. As part of your annual membership, sustaining members can also receive a commemorative calendar series. All the photos are part of a series that'll branch over several years. I think they were mainly donated by Dan Frizzy himself. So if you want to join as a sustaining member, get a collectible calendar, see Jim at the back table before you leave. Another thing is the caboose restoration project is still ongoing. We can't wait to see its maiden voyage to Belair, but we have the teaser table back there as far as donation cards with a little bit of information about that project too on your way out. The other thing is the Age of Steam Roundhouse trip is Saturday, June 20th. It's a motor coach trip to Dover, Ohio. It's also going to do a stop at the Ernest Werther Museum and Gardens, lunch on your own while you're there, and there's a lot of events going on that day. We wanted to pick something with a lot of activities for everybody that makes it worth your trip. So there's a Homefront to Warfront Steam Victory event. They're commemorating it. There's going to be reenactments, there's going to be food vendors, there's going to be lots of things going on that weekend. So if you're interested in that trip, it's $160 for sustaining and charter members for the Great Stone Viaduct. If you're not a member, it's $170. So if you're interested, see us at the back table for a flyer. It's being organized by Uniglow. But if you'd like to support the Great Stone Viaduct, we'd love to see you on that motor coach. I believe that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Kara. All right, so we've already dealt with the emergency broadcast alarms and all this other stuff today. We had a lot of excitement, so I will try not to be too long-winded tonight. That was supposed to be a tornado run, but I'm not on the game tonight. So I'll just remind everybody that we do have several other programs for our kids, teens and adults. I'm not going to go through all of them. We do have brochures on the back table. Please stop and pick some up, hand them out to your family and friends, just to help us get the word out. Attending programs like this is one way that you can support the library, but also getting the library card and using it often is also a great way to support the library. So please sign up for a library card if you don't have one. They are free. There's no reason not to have one. Okay. And then my normal, usual weekly announcements. If you are new to the library, I only see a couple new faces, but if you do need to use the restroom, go out the hallway to the left and take a left. The restrooms are through the hallway there. Our programs are live streamed, so we have the 2 left. If you can't make them, watch them online. They're always on our website the day following the broadcast. So if you missed some of the first ones, you can still go back and see them, and you can watch our future ones as well. And then before I introduce tonight's speaker, I do ask, as always, out of courtesy, that everybody please silence their cell phones now. And I'm watching everybody do that.
We won't hold it against them with the tornado siren.
That's true. That's true. Silencing your cell phone won't silence your emergency broadcast notification. So you get a freebie on that one. Okay. Our speaker this evening is Curtis Kyer, a lifelong Belmont County resident. Curtis serves as captain with Cumberland Trail Fire District, where he has been part of the department for 25 years. In addition to his leadership in public safety, he also contributes to community education as an EMS fire program assistant at Belmont College in St. Clairsville. Curtis is also a local history enthusiast, and his research into Belmont County's role in the Civil War has helped shed new light on significant local artifacts and military history. He's delivered programs for the Belmont County Heritage Museum and other historical organizations. Tonight, he is going to share with us the fascinating history of rediscovered St. Clairsville resident, military veteran, and community leader, Colonel James F. Charlesworth. Everybody, please welcome with us tonight, Curtis Kyer.
Thank you. When Erica asked for my information, I should have updated it because some of that was old. I am Curtis Kyer, and I talk loud, so I'm going to have to keep readjusting my voice. What's a little bit different is I actually just retired Cumberland Trail after 27 years full time, but I rehired and I do the fire prevention there now, but I'm also the deputy director for Belmont County EMA, which is why I won't hold it against you if your phones are going off with a tornado that could come this direction, but we're in the basement, so we're in a good area, so I'll keep going. So that happens. So a little bit of my history. I've loved the Civil War as long as I can remember, specifically when I was 4 years old in 1980 when my family went to Gettysburg. So that's me on here. And I like to point out, I actually just turned 50 yesterday, and my dad's in his 30s in this picture. So there's a big difference even in the age of that. And the other thing I want to say, and I'm going to bounce a little bit sometimes, but this will be the third time I've done this presentation. And every time so far, I've tried to adapt it a little bit. My last one was at Lawrenceville, and I focused a little bit more on Oregon's raid. This one here, I found another batch of new information that I was kind of throwing into it. But there's some really neat things that have to do with Belair involving Charlesworth as well. But for me, it all started there. I've always had that weird feeling when I'm on a national park. Like I've been there, there's a connection of some kind. I've always been interested in it, and it's what I've always been able to retain a lot of my, it's always what I've been able to do the best. But my job was the fire service. And in 2022, we had a group of young guys that wanted to put a little memorial up in front of the courthouse. And I was tasked with doing the history of St. Clairsville's fire departments, which started out with the volunteer fire department and went paid in 1990. I got hired in 98. So this gentleman over here, Mark Donathan, he was an old volunteer firefighter, worked at Wheeling Fire Department, retired there. He's kind of a history person, collector, and I started building some information about St. Clairsville's fire department history, which I'm still working on to this day because it's a never-ending process. In doing that, I was working part-time for Dominic Petranton in St. Clairsville. And Dom does a lot of work for the Thomas family, Thomas Jeep and Eagle family. They have been in St. Clairsville since the mid-1900s. They started out buying your carriages so that you could turn around and take that money to buy an automobile. So that's how long they've been in town. And Harlan Thomas, it would have been his grandfather that started all of that, and his father, who was one of the originators of the St. Clairsville Volunteer Fire Department. And this just come to me a few months ago. That is Harlan, probably about 2 or 3 years old, on what I think is the second fire engine for what would have been St. Clairsville Volunteer Fire Department. Now, I always hate to do this to Harlan. I love him to death, but I think he's in his 90s. So I hate to give his age, but that gives you an idea where some of that comes from. So Because I had known Harlan by doing some of that construction, I went to him to talk about fire service stuff. Once St. Clairsville got their fire engine, they were storing it in Thomas's garage down behind what is now behind Clarendon. And there's some video, there's actually video of you, it's on St. Clairsville Volunteer Fire Department page that was created where you can see the fire engines coming out of that building that is now just auto body to get up the hill. And he was able to tell me some really neat stories. And while he was never actually a member of the department, in his teenage years is when Thomas's would have been running a heavy rescue equipment. And I've learned in my years when I was starting out in the fire service that the tow companies were the original extricators of auto accidents, and that's the stuff that Harlan did. So I was getting a lot of that type of information from him. So I'm there asking him about that, and he had mentioned some Civil War stuff in my days with him, and he's a very wise person. Several years ago, he told me they were celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary, and I asked him if he had any advice, and he said it gets to be better after 50. And I said, Harlan, I've only 20 some years in now, that doesn't help me. So I started asking him other questions about the Civil War stuff, and he's like, well, I had a Civil War sword. I'm like, Harlan, what do you mean you had a Civil War sword? And turns out that he had found a sword. This was a newspaper article. Him and his wife think he's in his 20s because they don't remember when it happened. And I haven't been able to find the article. I think the newspapers, when I'm doing my research this particular day, seems to be missing, and I've never really been able to find it. And this is all his wife has. So I found out about this Charlesworth, and I was like, Harlan, I was like, what did you do with the sword? Well, how he found it was, this is, right here is Dairy Queen in St. Clairsville. This structure was a nursing home that his grandmother ran. This structure was tore down and rebuilt to this one here, and nurses would stay in there. Harlan and his wife stayed in there when they were newlyweds, but when they were tearing down the other structures, when he found that sword along with a Masonic sword. The sword had an engraving on it. No big deal, it was in the newspaper. I said, well, what did you do with it? He said, well, I gave it to my friend. So he gives it to his friend, Tom Minder. Tom Minder was the police chief in St. Clairsville, really big, huge Civil War buff, has all kinds of collection. If you go to the St. Clairsville Museum, a few of these items, I think it's these two right here, are actually in the museum, because when I recovered all the other stuff, they gave me these couple other things as well. So I started trying to figure out where this sword went. So when it was in December, I started making phone calls, and I was leaving messages on these random people when I was looking for Tom Minder. I found out he didn't have any children, which Harlan had told me. When he passed away, I went and looked at his and his wife's obituaries and was trying to find out where this thing could have been. So it just so kind of happened too that come to find out, Cindy Henry, our county individual, had helped take care of that family. But I also know Jeff Gazik, which is where that picture came from. This stuff was in a collection that Jeff Gazik had. And anybody that knows him, retired from St. Clairsville PD. He likes the PD history. And he would stop and see Tom when he was out as a rookie. He would have to stop and help Tom's wife. He was getting older and needed help once in a while. So he called Cindy. I told Officer Gazik all about that. And so he called Cindy Henry and said, Cindy, remember the Civil War sword? She's like, yeah, the nephew took it. I didn't need a name. I went and looked at the obituaries and started finding all these nephews. Well, I think the nephew that got them had passed away. I end up finding another nephew. So I find Alan Edgy as I'm doing my research, Eggy, and I'm leaving these random phone calls, which I'm being very weird. Who would want to answer their phone when I'm asking a question like this? But I had a really good idea that this was the correct one. And the message basically was, I'm looking for a family heirloom that your father may have got that had belonged to Tom Minder and that went to you after your aunt passed away, blah, blah, blah. So I wasn't specific on what the thing was. So I get a phone call back about 5 minutes later. He's like, this is Alan. He goes, you got my interest. What is this family heirloom you're talking about? And I said, well, are you? And I started asking questions, making sure I knew he was the right person. I said, well, the heirloom, I said, I believe it's an heirloom. It belonged to a guy by the name of Harlan Thomas many years ago. I said, it was given to Mr. Minder. And I said, but it's a Civil War sword that has an engraving on it. He goes, I'm looking at it right now. It was hanging on their mantle in the basement along with a couple other items that he had. I was able to, he immediately said, I want to get this back. I think this is a neat story. Harlan had already said, I don't need this thing back. And I obviously suggested he go to the museum. So the idea was that Alan and his wife came over, gave the sword back to Harlan, and got a little neat group picture. And then a few weeks later, I get it handed over to Jackie Pugh so that it goes to the museum. And then she's like, you know, you need to do some research on that, maybe do a presentation on it. Okay. So this is the day that the sword returned back to Harlan. It's actually on his kitchen table when I took the picture. So this is the model. It's a presentation sword from 1850. Now that's the model. That's not the year that it was made. It's the model 1850. And when I started doing some research, I was having a hard time, but I found this. The most prolific officer sword maker and inspector to the U.S. during the American Civil War was the firm of W. Clairsville and, I can't say that right, a Prussian, which is now Germany. And you can just tell by looking at it, this isn't just some average Joe Schmo's sword that they're carrying in battle with them. There's something special about this. It's pretty obvious. And there's the engraving presented to Lieutenant Colonel James F. Charlesworth, non-commissioned officers and privates of Company A, 25th Regiment Ohio Volunteer Infantry, as a token of their respect, April 28, 1863. I'm hooked. So this is always kind of neat. This is what tells me how special. Before I tell you anything else about Charlesworth when I get there, this slide alone, in my opinion, should tell you everything you need to know about this individual. The minimum price for this sword was anywhere from $40 to $100, and I'm going to say it was probably on the end of $100 when they purchased it in 1863. That's over $1,000 or possibly $2,000 today. So at $100, it's over $2,000. And let's add another $500 to that today, because that's last year's number. A union non-commissioned officer at that time was making $17 a month. And union privates were making $13 a month. These men did not have money, and they were sending it back home to begin with to support their families while they were gone, when they did get their money. So for them to be able to collect that within the regiment to buy this should speak volumes. Now, this is not his sword. This is what it would have looked like when they purchased it, which means the box, the sash, the belt, all of this is gone today, but it would have come like this when they purchased it. And this is, I don't remember which one it is, but I think it's this one here, that was issued. This is in the books that you can find today on finding information about it. So now I know that this guy has to be special, but why? So this is where we get into who. This was my first attempt at using AI to make something. I did this yesterday. So, James F. Charlesworth. I like the better idea of rabbit holes, and when I say rabbit hole, you should know immediately that when I say that word, I've probably deleted 5 or 6 slides in that rabbit hole, and there probably could have been 5 or 6 more slides added to it to begin with. And I'm trying to keep this short. And some of the people that's been in these before know that I talk a long time, and I have a hard time being done when I'm supposed to. I just could not believe the information that I was finding about him. Initially, in that December, when I found it in December of 2022, the only newspapers online was Ohio County's, Ohio County Library. I started finding stuff there, and it was really, really good. And then one evening, on a whim, at the fire station, we're not busy, I'm on my phone, and I realized St. Clairsville Library had posted their newspapers. I pulled that up, and I had taken a lot of those slides out, but I put my mom's name in there. My mom was an athlete, and my grandmother wrote for the newspaper, so guess what? My mom was in there a lot. So I found a treasure trove of my mother, and I was like, oh, wow. And I put Charlesworth in there. Thousands of hits. Couldn't believe it. Put my name in there for working at Cumberland Trail, now being deputy director. You're going to find me by doing the search, but I bet you it's not more than 50 or 60. We're talking hundreds and hundreds for Charlesworth. That was what started me getting the research and doing more and more stuff. So Now, when I did search my parents' name, I did find my birth announcement, and since that was yesterday, we do have that in here, so I'm a bicentennial. But the important part of this is that what I found out is that he was born in 1825, so the year before National Road was 26, correct? So the year before the National Road starts from St. Clairsville. And so where the Clarendon stands today, this was the building that stood there before the Clarendon, and it had different names, the National House, National Hotel. I'm not sure what it was called when he was there, but that's where he was born. And he was born to Richard and Jane Porter. And what I found on Richard Charlesworth was that he had articles in the paper all the time. This would have been when Charlesworth was very young, and he was a market person, so he would sell. Something that I've learned, I'm always learning such neat things, and I do a lot with it. The Great Western Schoolhouse, and I've learned a lot of stuff from Mr. Marshall about the National Road. And I never, when I think about a cattle drive, I think about Old West. But St. Clairsville was the start of those drives. That they would cross the river here in Wheeling and get over to Bridgeport and then go up the hill, and then they would be up there, and then that stuff would get drove west. So hence why there's taverns and all these other things and how that would go. So that's what his father would have done, would have been doing that to sell stuff, and a lot of that was coming and going over the National Road. So they end up leaving St. Clairsville, they go to Michigan. And sometime around 41 and 44, he goes to Grandview College, which is now called Denison University. He gets back home right about the time, and he ends up working with his dad in the store in Michigan, and he does some apprenticeship with another gentleman in the town over. I don't remember if it even said, but then the Mexican War breaks out. So he was 20 years old when the Mexican War broke out, and even had to be 18 to be in the military. You still had to have a parent's signature if you were under 21. His father signs the documentation, and James and his brother actually get on a boat, float down the Mississippi, and get down to New Orleans, and end up getting put into a regiment and served from July 24th, 1847 to July 31st, 1848. And the reason I threw these pictures in there is because even if you know just a tiny little bit about our history of wars, rifles versus muskets make a huge difference, which is why there was so much bloodshed in the Civil War, because we were using rifles and we're still using musket distances. Okay, but in 1847, this particular unit he's in is using rifles. So we're talking some of the very first military rifles, and they were at that time what would be an elite unit. So at 20 years old, he's an elite unit. He's fighting under General Winfield Scott, and so he is actually around a lot of very notable figures while he's in Mexico. He gets wounded. I know he draws a pension. I never found out what that wound was, but August 19th, 1847 is the Battle of Contreras, which has a little bit to do with the attack of Mexico City, and he gets wounded. They do some more time down there. When that's all said and done, he goes back home, and apparently when he gets back home, he decides that he wants to be a lawyer. How he ends up back in St. Clairsville, I have not figured out. For some reason, he does. He'd have been so young when he left, I'm surprised there was even still that connection there. So from 49 to 51, he comes back and he studies law in town, and then he gets a job to do law firm stuff. And October 16th, 1851, he was admitted to practice law. And he immediately starts getting jobs within the county as a lawyer. And I'm going to probably I'll hit them a little bit, but I won't get into much detail. But he ends up holding multiple different positions over his lifetime in St. Clairsville within county government. Never county commissioner. A couple times he tried to be a senator and other things like that, and would always lose by a little bit. But he always stayed right there in that focus of town. So this is the Sanborn map of 1887. The reason I threw this up there was I want to kind of talk a little bit about his area of some of the things we're going to talk about. When this map was made, this is the previous courthouse. So a lot of people, you guys are all here, a lot of you like history, so you know the first county seat was down here. Then it went to St. Clairsville. It was a log cabin in St. Clairsville. Then they built the 3-story structure brick building that stood on the corner. So this is where the Clarendon would be today. Of course, the current courthouse. This is the old courthouse. This would be the lane that's going back to the city building, St. Clairsville City Building. And this courthouse would stand there for 72 years. But one of the things I wanted to point out is that St. Clairsville originally had a town square, and it was right here. Our courthouse is sitting on Cross Street. If we didn't have the current courthouse sitting there, then right here would be St. Clairsville's town square. And as I'm going through the newspapers, when veterans were welcomed, they were welcomed at town square. When they would start, they would form up. Usually the parades would start for the fair. They would start uptown in the town square, and they would march down to the fairgrounds. Later on, when I started talking about the veterans, they would form up right here and walk down the street. But it always started right there on that street. So this here kind of shows you, I did this direction. So if we're standing at Clarendon, this is where today the library would be. So when you look across the street, that would be town square. And then this is the courthouse that was previous.
So did
Yeah.
Market Street continue north?
Yeah.
And it just
Yeah.
enter only by the square?
Yep. Okay, so I studied this a lot trying to figure it out. So there are different versions of the county history book. This is in one of the versions. So this is this is shown as a 2-story. I thought it was a 3-story structure, but this is the courthouse here. So the current courthouse is right here. So if you imagine standing in what would have been the town square, looking at what is now the Sheriff's Residence Museum, that's where that's sitting. And then you see, what do you have to go up to get up to the museum? A set of steps. And I remember when that was all done, it used to be a wall. There's the wall. So this is Main Street. Clarendon's right here. I'm in town square. There's the old courthouse. And then he lived up by what is now the Dairy Queen. And he would walk to work. That's how he would go to work. His offices would have been here. So 52 and 54, he starts to, he's doing assessment for personal properties. So he's doing lawyer stuff within the county. Doesn't have a whole lot of political position that I could see. The first mentions of politics is at that time period of 52 to 54, we're in an election year. And Winfield Scott is running for president in the Whig Party, and there's a lot of opposition to him. And this whole big article here is Charlesworth explaining his knowledge of what Winfield did in the Mexican War. And that's where I start to see the beginnings of his political, what his thought processes were. He was the Whigs of Belmont County Secretary, so that would be the first time I see where he's holding some sort of position within that. And he's also the Commissioner of Insolvents. That's what he's doing for the county at that time. There were so many things that I learned about our county when I did this that just blew my mind. As much as I know about the Civil War, as much as I know about militias, I never knew that St. Clairsville and Belmont County as a whole had a militia. And St. Clairsville was the Washington Guards, but there was most of the bigger towns in the county had them. They would train once a month or once a week, and then it was every so often he would put out an article in the paper. Everybody would come together in St. Clairsville, and they would train as one big militia unit. So any of the Civil War buffs know that this is a cherished item to find. This is Ohio Volunteer Militia. So this was one of the armaments that were issued to these militia units, and some of these would go on to be used during the Civil War. One of my favorite things was a rebel asked an Ohioan one day what that stood for, and they just happened to be in Mississippi. So he told him it was Ohio visiting Mississippi, because Ohio had so much money that they would just make a new belt plate for everywhere they went. So at this time, Charlesworth gets elected to be captain of this unit. He has experience, he's been in war, and he gets elected to be the captain. And for the next several years here, we're going to see him referred to as Captain Charlesworth in the newspaper. And they just train all the time. So then 54 to 56 is when he gets married. So he gets married, his father dies in 1855, and he marries Laura Talman. If you remember back when he joined the agency, he joined something in Talman. It's his daughter. that he marries. And I always noticed when I was looking, because they got married on July 4th. And I noticed when I was doing this research that none of these trainings and stuff was ever on July 4th. That may be because he was married on July 4th. I'm guessing that he wasn't out. But he's also in there as credited that, you know, he bought his wife one of these wash tubs. So at that time, and now, it was actually just recently that I realized that Belair was putting newspapers online. So that's relatively newer to me. But as of when I made this original slide, from 57 to 59, Wheeling's papers are missing for that time frame, and so is St. Clairsville's. So I don't know if there happened to be a flood that wiped a lot of that stuff out, but you know, as more and more libraries are adding stuff, you can either go individual to the library, or some of that stuff now goes to the national newspaper archive stuff that you can find. So this is why this presentation can change so often, because the information just keeps coming. It's new information. In this 1857, about December 56, he purchases and edits the Independent Republican until 1860. What was kind of neat that I learned was, and I think this goes for most of the towns I've done research, there was usually two newspapers. That was your social media. And they were factions. So one would be one party, the other would be the other party. So if you really want to know what they're fighting and arguing about, you kind of got to go to both of them to see both sides of the story. And I'm sure we're still not getting the correct story because it's the news. So if he wants to get out certain information, he's going to own that newspaper. I have not found those yet. I do believe there's Ohio archives, and one of these days when I can get away, I'm hoping to go up there, or hopefully they'll get online, because then I'll really find out what a lot of his political views were based on that newspaper. So this is where I was kind of struggling as I'm doing this. Politics are a very heated topic today. So how do I present somebody with what may have been his views if some of the people in the audience aren't going to have that view? And I found this little piece of article, and it really kind of important to me. Anathematize, which means to condemn. And so what he is saying in here, they were at a meeting and the political parties were arguing. And he stood up and basically yelled at them to knock it off and grow up. What that made me feel at that moment was that he was a moderate, which is how I always identify myself. I try to find the both on both sides. And I thought, okay, now I can be with him. Now, some people know, some people don't. Our political system flipped in the mid-1900s, if I think that's right. So at this time, he is identifying as a Democrat. Democrats are mostly Southern, which is what is going to be ones pushing to maintain slavery. So I was trying to find out what's his view on that. I've never quite, again, until maybe I find his newspaper. Here's what I think. I think he's a Democrat, probably more moderate, but what I know for a fact is he was absolutely against secession. So no matter what, regardless of how he felt about slavery and all of that, what I do know was he was against secession. So, and this is 1860, so don't forget that this whole part right here is about Democrat versus the new Republican Party that's getting going. So, April 12th, 1861, South Carolina fires on Fort Sumter. The Civil War is officially started. April 18th, in the very next Gazette article, there's a play-by-play of the entire incident and the president's proclamation that he needs troops. On May 2nd, he starts filling up his own company of soldiers. It says it's filling up fast, it's already training, and there's smack talk. The smack talk is because, again, the Gazette is a Republican paper, so they're smack talking Charlesworth because he's a Democrat. What these newspaper articles are basically saying is that he's going to form a company of men in St. Clairsville, Belmont County, and then take them south to fight for the southern states to secede. That's not what he does. May 9th, it's announced that it's a company of almost all Democrats. So if you don't want to be in a Democrat company, you better choose one of the other companies forming in Belmont County. And May 16th, they start meeting for drill. So we're going from April 12th to May 16th. He's already training troops, most of which are probably the ones that were in his militia in the 1850s. So Monday, June 3rd, from the Thursday paper, early in the morning, the people began to throng the town, and were satisfied our streets were never so full, only during our county fairs. At 11 o'clock, the company met at the courthouse and elected its officers. Charlesworth received a unanimous vote. At 1 o'clock, the company took part of the public dinner prepared at the National Hotel. At 2:30 o'clock, the immense crowd. Let me move over here. Where'd it go? Went to the town square to witness the presentation ceremonies. A company of 111 men marched east out of town, arriving in Bridgeport at 6 o'clock, where they met 2 more companies from Wheeling Island. The next morning, they left by rail for Camp Jackson, Columbus. Something else that was important about this is when the war was starting, everybody thought it was going to be quick. The Southerners thought they were going to kick the Northerners' butt. The Northerners thought they were going to kick the Southerners' butt. They thought this would all be over in a few weeks. And so when they were forming these regiments and these companies, they were doing it for 3 months service. James Charlesworth was the first person in the state of Ohio to form a 3-year company. When he signed these guys up in St. Clairsville, they were signing up for 3 years. So that should already tell you he's in it for the long haul. And it should also tell you that he's probably thinking this isn't quick. I think he knew better. So June 20th, Captain Charlesworth reports the rolls. This is what he sends back from Columbus. And almost immediately, they head out of town. And something that was a really neat thing, they leave July 27th, the 25th. The 25th leaves for Columbus for Western Virginia. The next few months, they march, drill, guard something moving to Cheat Mountain. Robert E. Lee's first engagement as a Confederate and lost was against the 25th Ohio. The 25th Ohio was in the battle that Robert E. Lee, the now famous Robert E. Lee, loses, and he gets reassigned because of that loss. They're sending letters back about the hardships. Then there's Greenbrier River. October, Charlesworth is home on leave, delivers soldiers money, gathers recruits, collects donations, and goes to Columbus to fight for new clothing. The clothing they were given is falling apart. They weren't given winter stuff. The guys are starting to get cold. The temperatures are dropping. Something else that I think I may have accidentally deleted was the 25th Ohio's memoir. He's only mentioned in there a couple times, because he ends up getting wounded pretty early on. But one of the 2 times he's mentioned is that when the 25th Ohio left Columbus, so there was 1 company from Belmont County and 1 company from Woodsfield. And it's that article, that little blurb in there says that they were the best marching unit to leave Columbus. And they credited it to Charlesworth. And we learn as we go down through here, he had an amazing ability to lead people. And you can see that. And I think that goes back again to the sword. I think he was just a phenomenal leader. There's a battle of Camp Baldwin. They talk about how good everybody did. The battle of the McDowell down in southern Virginia. Pretty big thing, and the 25th Ohio plays a major role of it. Then comes June 8th, 1862, the Battle of Cross Keys. So the captain arrives at Wheeling and states that Captain Charlesworth is shot through the bows and thinks he cannot survive but a few days. All the newspaper articles start saying that he is killed in action. Mrs. Charlesworth and her brother, J.C. Talman, have gone to him. Another article lists him as mortally wounded. And like I said, I actually just found one recently from a Caddis that said he was killed in action. At this battle, I'm going to mention Milroy here a little bit, but Milroy takes his brigade and pushes them out. And up here is where you see the 25th or somewhere where they come across. And as they're coming across the field, they got out ahead of everybody else, and they take a whole big volley from the Confederates up on an elevated area, and Charlesworth takes a round in his bowels. So the post-war medical journal states the ball entered a little over 2 inches to the left of his umbilicus, passing through his sword belt, his clothing, and entirely through his abdomen, making his exit inches to the left of the spine, a little below the brim of the pelvis. And fell down between his blouse and vest. They rolled him over and the bullet fell out. He was carried on a stretcher back to Mount Jackson, a distance of about 30 miles. After a few days' rest, he was taken to Winchester in an ambulance. After a few days, he was removed to Wheeling, and from there to his home in St. Clairsville. And an 1899 story I found that would be told in remembrance of a late Dr. Robert Hazlitt. This is going to be your Wheeling connection. So after getting wounded, Dr. Myers, the 25th Ohio Regimental Surgeon, rendered some attention. The surgeon went to the regimental headquarters, and upon being inquired of concerning the gravity of Colonel Charlesworth, he had been promoted between McDowell and Cross Keys. Asked them how he was doing. They said that it was a large dose of opium in order that he may die easily. It chanced that an acquaintance of Colonel Charlesworth overheard the remark and at once hunted up his injured comrade and told him the gravity of the situation. At Colonel Charlesworth's request, his comrade went and found Dr. Hazlitt, a surgeon of the 2nd West Virginia from Wheeling, and a personal friend of the wounded man, and brought him to the cabin. The other surgeon who had left the wounded man to die was summoned, and the two went to work to save Colonel Charlesworth's life. This, they say, succeeded in doing, though he was shot through the bowels, and Colonel Charlesworth is living today, again, this is 1899, that he still suffers from those injuries. This is a clipping from a journal. So there was a lot of medical journals, just like every war, we learn a lot about combat injuries, and a lot of medicine changes and advances because of that. It's happening now. The things that we're doing today is happening because of the stuff that's happening today. But he's in a medical journal, so this is a drawing of him where his wound was that went through. This would be a mortal wound today, and we're talking 1862, and he ends up surviving. He comes back home to recover, and while he's home, he gets promoted to lieutenant colonel. He still goes by Colonel Charles for the rest of his life, but he was technically lieutenant colonel at that time. The old political enemies start getting called out. Now, what do you think about that Democrat? Now, what do you think? He went to Virginia, and he got wounded and should have died, and now he's back. And so his prominence starts to really build at that point. He regains his health. He goes back to speeches and runs for clerk of courts. And in one speech states that he's no speaker, but he could drill the whole crowd if need be. And those were his words. So again, he had a way about him to take care of people. 1863 gets very interesting. This is where I lingered a really long time in Barnesville, and I'm going to really pass through this tonight. He tries to return to his regiment. On April 28th is the date the presentation sword is given to him, or what's the date on the sword. On May 6th, he presents a sword to Major General Milroy. If you remember, I said a little bit ago, Milroy was in charge of his brigade. So at this time, the armies are reforming, they're changing up. Most of the Northern Army in the eastern part is camped over in Chancellorsville. And that's where Charlesworth had went to actually resign his commission, see everybody one last time. They give him the sword. They also ask if he will drop off Milroy's sword. He goes to Winchester, gives Milroy his sword, and comes home. On May 13th, he resigns as lieutenant colonel due to the physical disability. May 13th. Just as in time to get home from Morgan's raid. So what ends up happening is he gets home.
He's the highest ranking person. Now, even though he's resigned his commission, that rank still means something. So he's the highest ranking person standing in Belmont County as Morgan is crossing the river into Ohio and working his way. He goes out and he gets put in charge of everybody. So he takes the militia that's out there, the farmers, and they stand up out there in Bailey's Mills and put up a stand. And what ends up happening is that there's a lot of versions of the stories of how it happened, but Morgan decides to turn and continue north, which ends up taking him to Old Washington. My version of the story is that Morgan found out that Charlesworth was there. And to me, Charlesworth is the Chuck Norris of today, and Morgan didn't want to deal with that. What probably really happened is that it is known that Morgan had a engineer that was absolutely amazing at telegraph. And when they were at Castle Station, they telegraphed the station at Bailey's Mills, which I didn't even know there was a station there. I just assumed it was Barnesville, but it wasn't. They telegraphed, and he was pretending. He was amazing at this, and he could mimic other people's patterns. So he's pretending to be a Union officer, dispatching to Bailey's Mills. Has the Union Army made it there yet? And the reply is yes, they're here in force and have the road blocked and protecting the trestle. And Morgan goes north. So I'm sure Charlesworth's name was never mentioned, but I think we can assume that it was that organization that is what probably kept Morgan out of Belmont County. Not so lucky for Jefferson. So Belmont County Clerk of Courts, he does that from 63 to 66. November 64 is when I start noticing, and I had noticed before when I was researching, he starts putting advertisements out. So wounded veterans coming home that need help with their pensions. He ends up becoming, for his private time or his private practice, he's more or less a pension lawyer. So you see all kinds of advertisements for that. And then also there was a political issue where there was an election going on and an individual come in the courthouse. They were trying to overthrow. They were saying he was miscounting the votes, and they actually go to fisticuffs, and he ends up winning, which again, I don't know how that happens when you have this wound, but they end up subduing this other individual and the election goes forward as it's supposed to. And then at that time, because Morgan had been through, they started doing more formalized militias in the area in Ohio. And those were usually individuals who had come out of service or were wounded, kind of like him, where if something ever happened again and the Confederates come north, they would have something. So he starts doing all kinds of stuff. 66, he's selling insurance. 68, he's a delegate for the Soldiers National Convention in New York. In 70, he raises money for a musical association in St. Clairsville. Anytime you see anything about a band in St. Clairsville in the mid-1800s, it was probably his money. Little fast forward, he never had children. He ends up passing away about the time of scouting. And I imagine if scouting would have been around at that time, he would have been at the forefront of doing that. As he does stuff for kids all the time with these bands and stuff. 1875, there was a railroad commission. I don't imagine what that would have been for, but he was on it, maybe for what's in the back. 1876, Mexican veterans, he becomes the secretary for that. He does all kinds of stuff with the Mexican War veterans. And at this time, the war's only been over for 10 years or so. You still don't have a whole lot of stuff going on for the Civil War veterans. 1866 to 65, he's master of commissioners. 1876. So when did the Agricultural Society start up for Belmont County Fair? 1849. And it was actually existed before that. So it existed, went away, come back. He was elected the president of the Agricultural Society in 1876. And the reason I haven't found it is there's a check mark is because 1876 or 7 is when the history of Belmont County come out. And at the time, he had just been elected president. So I'm going to have to start looking at articles to see how long he did that. But what happened in 1876? What was also special about 1876? It's the centennial. So a few weeks ago, I'm sitting at home thinking, what am I going to talk about at this presentation? Wait a minute. The 100th anniversary was 1876. Charlesworth would have been around. I wonder what Charlesworth did. So 1876 is going to be the centennial. This whole big article. So he would have been elected president to the Agricultural Society in January. That's when they were doing their voting, at least back then. And this whole big article's in here. And I'll do some zooms here in a second. This section right here is Charlesworth's section. So it's all about the festivities, the centennial celebration, the Jubilee picnic on the fairgrounds in St. Clairsville on Tuesday, July 4th, under the auspices of Belmont County Agricultural Society. So what's he doing? He's being a leader. He's trying to get the fair to be built up and get the fairgrounds to have people, and he's pushing this. And when's his anniversary? July 4th. What is he all about? Veterans. So this was the part that I think is the neatest, is that there was going to be a hot air balloon, and he's the one announcing it. So down here, James F. Charlesworth, president of the society. So he's going to have this balloon there. It's going to be a spectacle. Nearly every city and town of any consequence will have a centennial celebration on the 100th anniversary of American independence, which will be next Tuesday in the locality of Wheeling, Steubenville, Bel Air, Barnesville, Cambridge, Washington, Cadiz, and some other smaller towns preparing for the rousing celebration. The boss celebration, though, will be in St. Clairsville. And then down here, it is evident that the county hereabouts is getting ready to celebrate the centennial anniversary of American independence in a way that no one else has ever seen it celebrated, and in a way that perhaps our children will hardly see it celebrated in the long thereafter. The people are enthusiastic, and the subject is beyond precedent. So they're making a big deal about it. And then in the same newspapers, all these little blurbs. People who wish themselves to be where it's at is going to go to St. Clairsville. Come to St. Clairsville on the Centennial so you can see the elephant. Don't forget it. St. Clairsville will have the finest 4th of July celebration. So he was definitely an advertiser. St. Clairsville is the only town the only town in this part of the state that will leave a balloon ascension on the 4th of July. Who do you think put that in the newspaper? There'll be a fine display of fireworks in St. Clairsville, blah, 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 blah. So we see that they're making a really big deal about it, and he's playing a huge role in that. And I also find a proclamation in there from the mayor of St. Clairsville saying, no fireworks, no loud noises, none of that's going to happen. So there's all this big buildup for July 4th. And then July 4th comes and goes, so let's find out what happened. Well, it rained. All of that buildup. So, but the neatest part about this to me is they make all that big deal. The July 4th celebration started as soon as the sun went down on July 3rd. And it's neat when you read this, that it's interesting to read how they write that stuff. But all of the older folks in town went home to go to bed because it was getting late. But the young men stayed and kept hooting and hollering and yelling like Comanches. But then right down here, somewhere right in here, I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but right in here it talks about the fireworks and stuff going on at 12:01 a.m. in St. Clairsville. So apparently the ordinance didn't work very well. So there was a lot of neat things that happened. A lot of stuff did happen. One of the orders ended up canceling, which was Lorenzo Danford. So a lot of neat things. I just thought it was neat, especially being that this is our another anniversary. So this was what I mentioned. He did do some congressional stuff. He didn't get into that. In September of 1880, Belmont County Fair grounds hold a soldiers reunion. And the soldiers gathered in town. Charlesworth did a roll call for Company A, and there were 26 responded. Remember how many had left St. Clairsville? 111, I think. 600 veterans lined up with their battle flags of the 15th, 43rd, 50th, 60th, 98th, and 25th, and marched to the fair. And I found that a lot. They would a lot of times form up uptown in front of the courthouse in the town square. Everybody would come in from all over the county to do that, and they would march down to the fair, and that's kind of how they would open the fair. Okay, this is where Blair comes in. So the fight for the county seat, St. Clairsville versus Blair, 1883 to 1884. So when I started finding this, again, we know that Blair was a county, and we kind of know Blair wanted it back, and you kind of know these things. But man, I was just in shock when I found what I ended up finding. March 13th, there's a bill introduced by Senator Williams Cleveland. Before I finish that. So right now, the old courthouse is 72 years old. It's starting to fall apart. And the state is starting to allocate money to build courthouses all over the state, brand new courthouses. But right now, what's happening is Blair wants it back. And something else I've learned by seeing all these newspapers is I honestly today can't say why. I mean, we know why St. Clairsville is the county seat, but it doesn't make sense. They obviously did it for political reasons, but St. Clairsville had the road coming to it, and that was it. And when I'm going through this, I'm learning that every year they're building a new road, a road from St. Clairsville to Blair, a road from St. Clairsville to Warning to get to Glencoe. Because what was in Blair and Glencoe and Barton? The rail stations, because St. Clairsville still didn't have rail coming to it yet. So you had to get out of St. Clairsville to get in or out of the county. So Blair really made the most sense. But he's a lifelong citizen of St. Clairsville. He works in St. Clairsville. Everything has already been there. The fairgrounds is there. So he's going to make a push to keep it there. What I was finding is the reason it took so long is that nobody would put forth that legislation. It would have been political suicide for any political representative in Belmont County to say, well, I want to put the money toward Blair, or I want to put the money toward St. Clairsville, they're going to lose the other half of the county. It'll go political suicide. So he goes to Senator William Cleveland. Just so happens Senator William Cleveland is a Civil War veteran. So he goes to him, probably knows him through all the veterans organizations, and he is the one who puts forth the legislation. On April 3rd, there's an article that a telegram is passed the Senate heading home. Charlesworth is in Columbus, sends a telegram back to St. Clairsville to tell them that it passed the Senate, it's going to the House. On April 17th, the newspaper reports that there was a telegraph received from Charlesworth from Columbus that the bill passed in the House, which meant St. Clairsville was now going to be the county seat permanently. So a telegram from Colonel Charlesworth dated in Ohio, April 2nd, that Senator Williams' bill authorizing the section, and it was going to give out the money for the courthouse. That money is what's going to be allotted to build the courthouse that we have today, the jail that we have today, and the sheriff's residence that we have today. All that money. Now, it took several years for all that to happen, but that's where all that money came from. March 13th, the bill's introduced. Oh, I'm sorry, these are some more articles. So September 14th, Charlesworth comes to Blair to stir up interest in the courthouse ceremonies. Again, I'm reading this, I'm thinking, man, what the guts do you have to, you just stole the county seat from another town that wanted it. And then you went down there and presented to them, hey, come up here and enjoy this with us, and let's make amends and all get together. And Blair wasn't the only place he went to do this. He went to all the major towns in Belmont County to draw in the crowds to do this. The newspaper said that, again, I don't know who we credit or who we could credit, but the newspaper said that we should credit Charlesworth with the courthouse being in St. Clairsville. So September 22nd, 1885 is going to be Belmont's Gala Day. And that's where all the crowds show up. It ends up being allegedly like 10,000 people. They do a box for the cornerstone, which you can still see today. It's not where down low, it's up high, which I think I have a picture to show you later. All kinds of stuff happened. He was also a Freemason. He wore his entire Mason garb, and in order to do that presentation for that cornerstone laying, it was a big, huge deal. So this is not him, but this would have looked like that is the time. This is probably what he was wearing when he did the ceremonies. Something else growing up, I always know that there's the Grand Marshal. I just thought that was the person that rode in the convertible in the front of the mayor's probably done that, in the front of the parade. Well, that person had a job when the parades. That person was who formed the parades. And guess who was the Grand Marshal almost all the time for every parade in St. Clairsville? He was. So today, he would get to ride in a convertible in the front of the parade. Back then, you would have been in charge of lining everybody up and telling them where to go. So he was, I kept trying to remember the correct thing, but he was a Knights Templar of the Freemasons. So he was very high up in that organization, and had a lot to do with that. Yet another thing that he did. So here is the corner today, and there is the cornerstone. So when you come in through this little section right here, and you're standing at the Veterans Memorial, if you look up, that's where the cornerstone is.
Is that the northwest corner?
What's that?
Is that the northwest corner?
So that would be the southeast corner. Yeah, the sheriff's, the jail and residence is over here. The front door is over here.
Southeast.
Yeah. So what's going to end up happening, and there's a picture at the end, when they redo all of this, the two walls that are right here are actually going to go out to Route 40. That's going to be what will be like the announcing entrance, where it's going to say Veterans Plaza, and this will all be open. And eventually someday there may be a plaque or something over here, a little bit more about the courthouse, which will probably have him listed in it. I'll hit this a little bit quick. The Clarendon. So the Clarendon opens up on December 25th, 1890. And guess who's one of the guests of honor at the Clarendon for their first dinner? And it's Charlesworth and his wife. So he was born in the hotel on that corner. They tear the hotel down and rebuild a brand new, beautiful building that's still standing there today. And he was at the meal for it. This was, I don't think I made it in a note. Somewhere on here it says what they had to eat. Yeah, Blue Point oysters, half shell. Yeah, it was a big deal. I'm not sure when that was taken, but that gives you an idea of what it looked like back then. Memories of the Old National. It stood for 71 years. It spoke of stagecoaches, people who stayed there like General Andrew Jackson, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna stopped there for refreshments. I went and looked that up to find out if that really happened. Santa Anna gets captured, and they were bringing him up the river. And when they got to Cleveland, the river was iced over. They had to go overland, and his stagecoach came right through St. Clairsville. He was ill, and I think got out long enough to get a drink and use their facilities and got back in. But Santa Anna was in St. Clairsville. So who was there? And he was 64 and 1 month old during this ceremony. 1898, he's postmaster, does something else, trying to speed up a little bit. So this is where he does the other thing that he excels very well in. I've kind of covered a lot of the politics. I've told you he's done a lot for veterans. But the Grand Army of the Republic, so the GAR, every major town had one. Wheeling, Martins Ferry, Bel Air, all the big towns had them. Armstrong Mills had one. That was the veterans groups post-Civil War. They're starting to gain traction. They started in 1866, but it took a long time before they really picked up. It would become the largest Union Army veterans organization. It was used to fight for veterans benefits. It's where we get our Memorial Day today, was Decoration Day. The first observance was May 30th, 1868. They chose that date because no significant battle had happened on that day. It started to be called Memorial Day in 1882 for all the veterans, so that it would honor all veterans and not just the Civil War ones. And it stayed May 30th until 1971 when it became an official holiday, so that it would hit on a Monday weekend for us. But it was always May 30th for that reason. The first mentions of it that I was able to find, if you take the time to read these, what you start to see is these are complaints about Decoration Day, because money was being used to do it. So let's think about that for 1 second. You have all of these widows that are raising their children because their husbands and brothers and fathers died, and there's money being spent for flowers and flags and parades and all this other stuff. So there was a lot of dissension for that. And these are all St. Clairsville articles where they're kind of upset that that's going to happen. Wheeling, Martins Ferry, Bridgeport, Barnesville, Flushing, they all had a GAR unit before St. Clairsville. So St. Clairsville decides they're going to do one, and who do you think's the very first person to be in charge of it? Colonel Charlesworth gets elected to be the first post commander of that. They become Drummond Post 203. Thomas Drummond died in the last days of the Civil War. He's buried in the cemetery behind the courthouse. This happens after there's an official bill to make Decoration Day the official holiday. So we jump into this in St. Clairsville when it becomes an official holiday. A lot of neat stuff about Drummond Post that I found, where Thomas Drummond's father came and issued a flag, which we can see a picture of. Something that I found out that I think I have coming up, though, is something else that he did. So what they would do is they would form up in front of the courthouse. They would walk west to what is now the red light at Marietta, turn and come back to the street that takes us to the now city building, and they would come down this way, and then they would go to the cemetery right here. Now, when they were all still young and spry, they would do the decorations at that cemetery and then walk to Union Cemetery out behind that one down the road. When they got older, they either didn't do it or they got to the point where they were doing it in carriages. This is another really neat Wheeling story. And when I found it and realized it and read a couple things and went and found the newspapers, the Wheeling newspapers are loaded with this story. So remember, Charlesworth is a Democrat. And Grover Cleveland was going to be the first Democrat president since the Civil War. So a lot of our area is still very heavily Republican, and they're still very bitter about the war, and they don't want a Democratic president. What ends up happening is that they're going down Main Street. So every year they would do a different
what they called encampment, and all the Civil War veterans would come in, and it was always in a different city. In this particular year, it was in Wheeling. So they're going down the street, they turn and go up the other street. I think it's been a while since I've read it. If you read it, it tells you exactly how they did it. But one of the newspapers had a banner hanging over the street that says, "God bless our President, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, Navy of the United States." And that infuriated the Republican veterans, mostly from Pennsylvania. And when they started going down the street, they refused to walk under this. And what they do is they start splitting up and they start walking around, and now they're pushing the crowds, and it becomes this huge melee until Charlesworth comes up the street with the Belmont County veterans. And he rides right up underneath that, takes his hag, and kind of does a little horse prayer, puts his hat back on, and continues on. Kind of like there you go. The other part about that was what ended up happening by the veterans that did that. It ended up being a very disrespectful thing, and you see in the articles following that the citizens were very upset. Some of those units were so passionate about how upset they were that banner was hanging there that they dropped their regimental flags and dragged them down the street, and then picked them up when they got to the other side of it. So they were desecrating their flag over the anger of that. So a lot of stuff, but the whole story, what makes the most out of all these articles was Charlesworth and the Belmont County veterans going up and doing that underneath it. So when the stuff started coming to me, I'm talking to Mr. Eggy about the sword and stuff, and I mentioned that, Charlesworth is in the Veterans Unit for the GAR, and he's like, GAR? He goes, what is that? And I said, that's the Grand Army of the Republic. He goes, I got a picture right here that says that. He ends up having this picture. So this is St. Clairsville's Drummond Post 3. I'm not sure what year it is. They're all getting aged there. This flag is the flag that was made by Thomas Drummond's dad and presented to them when they formed up. I knew this was the courthouse and was trying really hard to find it. And also, because it's my story and I tell it how I want, I think this is him. But there are a couple other people in here that it could be. And something come up the other day that makes me think that this also could be him. There's 2 or 3 guys in here who have no idea exactly which one is him. But I'm trying to figure out where this was. And then I remembered a picture that I got that was an old volunteer fire department picture, and it's in the back side of the courthouse. And I thought, that's that spot right there. So the first group that got to do this, and I never did post that picture on Facebook. We walked out and recreated the picture, but this is the back corner of the courthouse. So as we stand right here, we have you guys are sitting in the parking lot, the sheriff's residence is right here, the jail is right here, the Warren Church is right here. And that's where that picture is taken on the back side of the courthouse. And by the way, that could have probably been his office that they may have been using that door to go in and out of when they would have meetings and stuff. And my youngest son, Ethan, helped me lay all this in, which we thought was really cool. I had some more for him to do on other pictures, but this was the only one that got done. All right, so at the same time that happens, I remember there being pictures on Facebook, and I went back and dug and found them. 2016, Cheryl Hummel posts these pictures, asking people if they know anything about it. And anybody in here that follows our local history stuff, you're going to know the names. Tom Buckley picked out that it's got to be a Civil War GAR from the 1890s and 1900s. And he sees something that says Soldiers' Sons. This picture's cut a little bit, but that drum right there says Soldiers' Sons. Shirley notices that there's possibly the same people in both pictures, so they think that the 2 pictures might be related. Kim Shutway wasn't sure about it being St. C, but then Nancy Ramsey was up and said, oh, no, that's Decoration Day, and that's definitely in St. Clairsville. Judge Sargis and Gabe Hayes jump in.
And they say, no, they picked up similarities. That's the cemetery they think at Methodist, which is the one behind the courthouse. And Gabe also had a good idea on the buildings. So I actually get a hold of Cheryl, and she gave me these. These pictures are currently at the museum.
Tasha, I believe she was a Kyer.
Okay.
Okay. There was someone in the lower end of Blair, by name of Township.
Okay. So this is a better scan of that. So here's the drum where it says Soldier Sons. And Soldier Sons was the money that Charlesworth raised, and these were veterans' sons that was in this band that he helped create. This is the Drummond flag. I'm not sure, but that is somebody's regimental flag. I just don't know which one.
I think that's our building.
What's that?
I think that's our building.
It's not.
It's not.
Well, unless you go to the one across the street.
That's
so
costing.
I got it right here.
Okay,
So
okay.
there's the library. There's the Zell building. These two buildings, remember how I said this started? How did all this start? A building burnt down, killed some Brookside firefighters, St. Clairsville formed the fire department. The two buildings that stood here are the two buildings that burnt down, and these were what was rebuilt. This building is still there. This building is this building. These two buildings are the ones that burnt down that killed the Brookside firefighters. And this is when everything for me went full circle. It's hard. This is definitely a regimental flag that's original. It possibly could be Company A, 25th Ohio's flag. I'm still trying to prove that. There's the drum. This goes on about how he was raising money to do for the kids. And then the cemetery. Spent hours at Union Cemetery, Methodist Cemetery, trying to line this up. Hours. This isn't the correct lineup, but that's Ethan standing somewhere where we were trying to mimic him. Oh, by the way, this is blurry. In the clear, I think it's this guy right here. In the clear image is who I'm thinking is Charlesworth. He's got to be in this picture, and he's got to be in the front. Has to be. Okay, so same thing here. We have 2 or 3 guys that fit that exact same description. He's probably one of these couple or 3 right here. He usually had a goatee from some of the stuff I see. So we're trying to figure out where it's at. Kept going back over and over again. And then something finally caught me one day that in the very right of that image, you can see a power pole. And while it's not in the exact same location, it's not going to be too far away because anytime they replace a power pole, it's going to be pretty close. And that's when the power pole, and I was like, the power pole is what I need to be lining up. And so when I lined it up, there's the power pole. There's the power pole lined up with the current power pole. So that means they're standing in this area right here. What's in that area? There's them kind of inlaid with the things that are there. This is looking away from them. So they would be standing, we are standing where they're standing in the picture looking, and this is what will end up being erected. Lorenzo Danford, I mentioned his name earlier. He was a very high-ranking politician, and he had died the year before. So they were standing in front of, they were decorating his unfinished grave, and that's why it still has the mound and dirt stuff from when he passed away. So that puts the date of these 2 pictures was, so he died June 19, 1899. So it should have been May of 1900 that this was taken. So the flags, I kind of talked about the flags. So if anybody ever finds this in their basement, please let me be the first one you call. So it would have looked like this, only theirs was white, but it would have been very similar to that. And it would have said, probably would have said Department of Ohio GAR on this side, and the other side should have said Thomas Drummond Post 203. So there's the explanation of it. And then that's the same flag that's leaning up against the doorway in the back when they do the back photograph. So is that the 25th Ohio battle flag? So that has had me deep diving a lot into the 25th Ohio. I don't think this is the same as this one. This one is the one that you will see a lot when you look up the 25th Ohio, but I do not think that's the flag. I kind of think I might have skipped that a little bit, but the flag was presented to the 25th, Company A, before they were Company A. It was presented to them in the town square before they left town. The ladies of St. Clairsville sewed it. He brought it back once for repairs,
and was trying to figure out what had happened to this thing, and that will come up again in a minute. So here we have, if this is the only for sure, until a couple days ago, this is the only for sure picture I have of Charlesworth. So that's why I think that's him in that picture. And in the picture behind the courthouse, his head's cocked a different way. So I took the image and flipped it so that his head cocks the same way as he does in this picture. And he's kind of got that Colonel Sanders thing going, and I think that guy does. One thing I know about men and their facial hair, I'm not allowed to have it, but generally when they keep it, that is their, their thing. And that's why I think that's him in the other picture. And then this picture came up. So I get asked to come down here, and they wanted the information that I didn't get to her, and that's why some of it was a little outdated. And I typed in Charlesworth on Facebook, and boom, this pops up from 2015. Kim Lewis Shutway was another big person that always posts stuff. And it somehow or another it pops up because it had Colonel Charlesworth on it. And this is numbered. So this is in the shoebox for the St. Clairsville Library. So you might imagine what I'm going to be doing in the coming days or weeks. Sorry, honey. Spending some time trying to find the original because I want a good scan of it. So picture of St. Clairsville's first car. And this is the names of everybody. Colonel Charlesworth. And if you look over here, he's number 5. So this is officially the second photo that we know that's exactly of him. And literally just figured this out a couple days ago as I was updating and trying to prepare everything. So something else that I really wanted to say about him with some of this. So the centennial history of Belmont County. Just so happens I went to the Questers meeting on Monday, and they were selling some of their extra copies, and they had the centennial history of Belmont and Jefferson County. It was the one that was reprinted in 1976. So the book's 50 years old. I had just turned 50, and they wanted $50 for it. Again, sorry, honey. That's why the book's there. 50, 50, and 50. It just kind of all worked that way. But this, remember I said a little bit ago that I found that the centennials have a little bit different things in it. I think over the years they may have added stuff so that one picture's in one book and not the other. But both of them, the following is a list of soldiers of 1812 from Belmont County upon records and possession of Colonel J.F. Charlesworth. Down here, he's listed. He knows something. He knows something. He knows something. These are all quotes that he gave when they were writing this book. So he played a role in some of our history for writing this. And I would argue that it probably wasn't just the War of 1812 names. When you go on the websites and you see everybody from Belmont County, a lot of that stuff was done back in the 80s, I think, maybe, when that was put on, because they got it out of this book, was probably because of it. So 1916, April the 7th, 1916, his wife passes away. She's 80, and they had been married for 62 years and passes away from an illness. And he passes away a few months later, August 2nd, 1916. And newspaper after newspaper, all the major towns had something about it. And all of it was about how much he had done for veterans and how much of a role he played in things and his politics in the county and just a lot of information. Talks about the funerals. So there was one really neat article that talks about how influential he was, which I think is that one over there. It's pretty touching the way it was written, and talks about everything that he had done, and talks about his last Memorial Day, the very last Memorial Day. So he passed away 1917. So that year for Memorial Day, he did it in a carriage. He still went in the carriage and watched the sons put the flowers and the flags and stuff, all that stuff out. He was still a part of it till he died. So he's buried in Union Cemetery, and there's going to be another full circle thing here that I think is interesting. So this is me standing, I think I'm standing with my back at his grave. No, I'm sorry, I think he's right here. So what do you see over here? We have a landmark. So we've got the water tower, so we know the courthouse. These trees are blocking the courthouse. I'm sorry, that's his grave. Okay, so over here is where, until not very long ago, is where Harlan Thomas and his wife was living. If I was at Harlan's house and I stepped out in the street like this,
I could see Charlesworth's grave if it wasn't for the trees. If I am standing here and look that direction, I can see the courthouse. And if I stand there and look that direction, what I'm going to see is up here is where the veterans do their Memorial Day thing in Union Cemetery. Where he is at, he can see Harlan Thomas's house, he can see the courthouse, and he can see where veterans still honor on Memorial Day. Seems pretty fitting for him, even though it was an accident. And then you walk straight up the hill, and then up here is where all the stuff is for the the Revolutionary War soldiers. These are the memorials for them. And again, you can see the courthouse that he helped to have put there. If there was ever a citizen of our town loved, it was Colonel Charlesworth. He was known to the children as well as the older citizens, and was never happier than when he was drilling the boys who were members of the drum corps. He having charge of the organization as long as his health would permit. Few men have a record to equal that of the colonels. And so what I did here was we went out when we did the first one, and we went out and recreated that picture. So kind of two different endings here. So one of my endings is that how easy is it that we forget that we are walking the footsteps of giants? In Belmont County just used to be such a bigger role in politics. We've had a lot of really popular and unpopular politicians come through here.
Lots of presidents have been here. There was a picture the other day of, I can't remember who, on the courthouse steps. I think JFK was here. So, a lot of people been to Wheeling, St. Clairsville in our area. So, it's hard to forget that he literally lived right over here and walked up here every day. And this would be the good angle of where the other courthouse sat. And that gives us an idea of why there was a wall out in the front, because it was built up. And then I'm standing in the center of the street, and you can see that if this wasn't here, I would be right here would be Town Square. So I had some friends, which I believe are on YouTube at the moment, that was like, why don't we have something named after him? Or why don't you get something named, a road, a street, or something? Not, they were on me. So I got a audience with the commissioners. I found out that they were trying to get the plaza done. And so I went to them, and I was told beforehand that they would not name it after an individual. I wanted to name it Charlesworth Square. And there's already, we already have honors to Medal of Honor recipients that are just worthy of having it named after them, and they had already turned down other families. So they're not going to name it after an individual. I would still argue that he's the father of everything that we do that has to do with veterans to this day. But they did say they would name it something else. So they just say that's why it's going to be named Veterans Plaza. And it was, again, my choice first was Veterans Square. Well, there's no square there. And nobody else would know except you that was a square. So so this was the last picture they put out. And then I said that they were repurposing the walls that are over there. So these are the two walls that are over there. They're going to come out. Belmont County Veterans Plaza. And then they're going to revamp all of the memorials and stuff up here. And something that, just in order to go a little quicker, that I breezed over a little bit, when he would put out the articles to form up for the parade, or to form up for the militia units, or to form up for the GAR, he would put in there to meet on the west front corner of the courthouse. So what we have to do is we have to envision the original courthouse sitting right here. We have to envision the west front corner. And what he is going to have when this gets done, I will implore you to go look, and there should be 2 bronze feet there when they're done that is going to represent Colonel Charlesworth forming up the bands and the boys and the parades and all of that. And that's going to be his legacy. He'll probably end up with something in here at some point, but at least initially the bronze feet are what's going to be his. So I don't know how long I went, but it was probably too long, and I'm finally done. Thank you. Is it literally 2 hours?
No, 1 hour, 20 minutes.
Okay. Hey, she said 1 hour and 15. I'm proud of myself.
What flag is that?
What's that? Oh, so what I realized is somehow when I was trying to adapt stuff, I think I accidentally cut it out. So hold that thought. I'm glad you asked me. I said I had some more on the flag If you want an idea how much stuff I have on him, let me scroll. So if you want an idea of, oh, it's not showing. I need help. Can you help me? I don't do the mouse pads very well. Close out that. I think I lost it right there. It is. Okay.
Let's see here. What's up there?
While you're looking, I applaud your passion, your research, and your knowledge.
Thank you. So I was going to show them how much was here.
Oh, yeah.
This is,
Direct that way.
there we go. So almost all of this is just articles and stuff, and I had to do by year and some other stuff. But we were asked about the flags. That arrow is going to be a little death of me here. Okay. Takes a second to open. All right, so the question was about the flag, and there is a piece of a American flag at the American Legion in St. Clairsville. So at the time that I am doing all this digging and research, I knew there was a flag down there. I'm a history person and I love Civil War, but I had forgotten whose flag it was. I'm honestly not sure how I accidentally deleted that, but it happened. Okay, so this is hanging at the Legion in St. Clairsville. And what you need to envision is that the American flag is hanging here. This is the Union on the corner. So you have the correct number of stars and an eagle on here. And we actually went over there to do an Eagle Scout project, and I went over to reread it. And when I did, this flag was made by the ladies of St. Clairsville, Ohio, and presented by them to Company A of the 25th Regiment of Ohio Infantry Volunteers, May 1861, then commanded by Captain Charlesworth, blah, blah, blah. It was used as the regimental colors of all principal engagements of the war, 61 to 65. It shows for itself 27 battles. So this is the flag turned correctly. So now it would be looking like if it was hanging here. My plan is one of these days is I'm going to try to get somebody to recreate it digitally. But you can see there's the American Eagle head. He's turned to the right, his right. That's a wing. That's a wing. Down here is the arrows. The bundle of arrows he's carrying. And then your stars. And like I said, that's the correct number for 1861. So it's in really bad shape, obviously. Something else that somehow I don't know how I did something, I screwed something up on it. When Valaire's newspapers went online and I started digging, I just typed in Charlesworth and boom, something came up. There was a Granddaughters of Union Veterans organization. I don't remember what it was called and I don't have it in here. And they had possession of this. And it was in the newspaper article that they had possession of it. And it was in bad shape and it said that it was the corner. So up until that article, I still wasn't sure if this was part of a full flag or if it was what's called a guide on. And a guide on would be at the end of a regiment. So that each, when regiments originally started, there would have been 1,000 men in them. So it would have, you're talking 50 yards long. So it's hard to see from one end to the other. But that article tells me that that's where that flag came from. So it's still very plausible that this is the flag that we see in the picture for that day. But it's hard to tell. Now, I keep finding references to other flags. There's other people that claim to have parts of 25th Ohio flags. Something that I do know is generally when we see a flag for a particular regiment, what ends up happening sometimes is that's not the only one they had. They did wear out, they did get destroyed, the wind damaged them, and as the years went on, and they would get new ones issued to them. And the 25th was issued a new regimental flag later on. It was later on toward the end of the war while they were in Cleveland. I think the picture of the flag I was showing this, the 25th, I think that's the flag that was reissued to them. I think they were carrying this one, and I also think this may have been at Gettysburg. So the 25th Ohio was all but almost annihilated at Gettysburg, and when they left, they actually led the column when they left Gettysburg, and the townspeople noted how ragged the flag was, having been in so many battles. 25th
Was a lot. They dwindled down to, I think there was around 100 left in the whole regiment left in Gettysburg, and they lost several there. So a lot of neat stuff with the flag. So hopefully that's something that we'll still keep building. And as more and more libraries add stuff and newspapers that weren't in existence, and somebody asks me to do a presentation and I type in Charlesworth, and new stuff will pop up. So
We have Union Street with a Union soldiers used to status crossing the river, Virginia.
Yeah.
Now, Union Cemetery in St. Clair's, I've been there. So we just dedicated only to Union soldiers or to?
the Union Cemetery's been there for a really long time. Union and the Methodists have been there for a really long time. Union Cemetery was the original cemetery for the Presbyterian Church. The Union Cemetery was originally the Presbyterian cemetery for the Presbyterian Church. So First Presbyterian as it exists today, that's I think the fourth structure. The first structure sat up on the hill of Union Cemetery. The oldest part of that cemetery is Presbyterian, and he's in that section. And he was a member of First Presbyterian. First Presbyterian has a history book. I think everybody knows that there was a cyclone that went through St. Clairsville in the 1800s, and the current church was built 1880 something because the other one blew down, and he's in the member rolls when that happened.
That's why I was asking, because Union means the Union Army.
That wasn't named for the Union Army. It was already Union Cemetery before the Army. Yeah. I think it had unions connected to Ohio, but Union Township, and there's different unions, so it's probably a name.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.